Welcome everyone. Welcome back to mysugartv.com. My name is Tony and I'm your host. Today I wanted to talk to you about I think what I feel is the most important thing when it comes to managing diabetes. You might say it's medication, you might say it's diet, you might say it's exercise, and I know those are all important, but there's actually one thing I feel is the most important, and that would be testing. Now, I know when you hear testing, maybe there's a certain percentage of people out there that say, "Oh, testing again." Everybody tells me to test, and I hate doing it, right? And it's not a fun thing, obviously. I mean, every time you poke yourself, it hurts, and there's a lot of things that go along with testing too. The inconvenience of actually having the meter everywhere you go. I mean, these things are pretty tough to do. But I'm here to tell you that testing is really the most important thing when it comes to diabetes. And the reason why that's true is because without understanding where your diabetes is, let's say in the morning and after your meals, if you don't know where your blood sugar is, then how do you know if the medications are working? How do you know if your exercise is doing anything? How do you know if your diet or what you're eating, and you're thinking about more of the stuff that you're eating now? Well, how do you know if these things are working? And we get a lot of people that come here and they say, "Oh, my friend told me about this supplement, and it's supposed to be great for diabetes." And what we say is, what? If it's great, wonderful, take it. But you got to make sure that it's working, and the only way to know if it's working is by testing, right? So testing is a really important thing because it's really a feedback for you. When you get a number, that's information about yourself, about your blood sugar at that moment in time. And a good education program really kind of gives you an idea of, okay, if that number is here, and if it's a little bit out of range, then what do we need to do to get it back to the range? I mean, that's kind of the goal of every program, I feel. At least that's how it is here. So, testing, although it's no fun, and it is inconvenient, and it does hurt sometimes, it is a very, very important part because it's a feedback for you to understand that things are doing well, or maybe they're not doing well at all. One of the things that I really worry about for people that maybe have tested in the past and they say, you know what, I don't like testing anymore. My doctor doesn't tell me to test. He doesn't really, stress that. And my worry on that point is, that if you got to that stage, that means at some point somebody really didn't tell you the significance of testing. And what happens usually over time is you just don't know. I mean, you test, let's say, when you're newly diagnosed, and then as you get through it, then you don't test at all because you say, I know my blood sugar is about 130 or something like that. And that's how you feel, and you kind of guess at that number, but you really truly don't know until you test. And that's the problem. I mean, you could feel, about 130, but are you really 130? And more than likely, when you test, you're probably not going to be where you think you are. So that machine is really giving you an idea of where your blood sugar is. Now, one of the things that I notice a lot is when people started testing and then they don't test anymore, what happens is they get higher numbers. They get numbers that are so out of the range that they just give up. And they say, you know what, why should I test? Why should I test when I know that my number is high? And that's what they say. Why should I test? Because every time I test, that number that I get from my tester, to a certain degree, is telling me that I'm a bad person. I'm a bad diabetic because my number is so high or out of the range. And a lot of people feel that way, and that's why they don't test. If you get into that routine of thinking that way, then you'll never test, right? But the whole idea behind any testing is, what is the number now and why is it there? And so you have to understand that, okay, if it's 300, well, that means that maybe the medication isn't working, or my diet isn't quite right, or maybe you do know why it's 300, which is great, because if you understand that, then at least you have a reason for that. Let's say, oh, you know what, I know, let's say you go to a wedding, a birthday party or something, and you know what, you feel like that piece of cake, and you shouldn't completely deny yourself of the pleasures of life because you have diabetes. But if you know you're going to eat that cake, at least you know your blood sugar is going to be at 300, right? So, so you eat the cake. But if you test and you're at 300, at least that's a little bit more information for you to know, hey, you know what, next time, maybe that cake wasn't right for me, or, maybe that was my break from diabetes today. 300s are no good. We don't want anybody to have those. But, it's going to happen. And, it's a personal choice that you make. But the fact is, at least you know it's going to happen, right? And then other times, you'll test and you'll be back in range. Wonderful. That means that your medications are working and that your diet is working and your exercise is working. All these things are working to make sure that that blood sugar stays in the range. And that's the goal, is to stay in the range. So testing, although it's not fun, it really is a big part of diabetes. Without testing and understanding where you are, and don't feel that the number is telling you you're a bad person. If anything, when you were newly diagnosed, or maybe you're diagnosed now, or you've had diabetes for a while, it was a disservice if somebody didn't tell you, okay, if your numbers are this, then, well, you know what, it's got to go back in the range, and maybe your medication isn't working, so you need to get that information to your doctor, your physician, your certified diabetes educator, your diabetes educators, and let them know, hey, you know what, something's happening here, and I want to know how to make sure that goes back to range. So it's real key. Now, testing is individual as well, and so for that reason, there are many different testers out there, right? I can probably think of at least 15 testing machines that are out there, and I'll tell you what. When it comes to testers, blood glucose meters, it really has to be a personal preference of yours. I mean, they all have different pros and cons, and gadgets and little features and things like that. And so it's going to be individualized to you because you have a huge amount of choice. Now, the one thing that would narrow that choice is your insurance. And insurance, usually how that happens is the insurance has a formulary of certain testers that are in that formulary at a tier 1, 2, or 3, and depending on what tier it is, you pay a lower copay or a higher copay. So you may be restricted to that, but I tell you what, insurances are pretty good when it comes to blood glucose meters. At least they'll have a couple of choices available. So you'll have your choice. Maybe not out of all the 15, but you'll still have a choice, which is nice. So that's the first thing you really need to do if you're not testing, is to get a meter that's covered under your insurance, that's got a good copay, that's not too high, so that you can start testing. Because once you start testing, that's when you start understanding your diabetes. And once you start understanding your diabetes, maybe at the very beginning you might be testing a little bit more, but later on you're not going to be testing as much because you'll start understanding things. Although, if you stop testing completely, then that's when you lose focus of your diabetes. And we see that here all the time. We see people here coming in, and there's two types of people. There's ones that, okay, you know what, I need to know all the time, and they test 6 to 8 times a day, even if they don't have to, because they really want to know what's happening after every meal, every day of their life. And then there's other ones that test once a day, and then maybe that may be good enough to know what your fasting blood sugar is and what is your your 2 hours postprandial. I mean, maybe 2 times a day is enough for some people. And then there's other people, depending on if you're on insulin and other medications, that you may have to test a little bit more, so that that you can regulate that insulin, so you don't go low and you don't stay high or anything like that.